Hi, and welcome to our presentation about Empower, Specialized Residential Services for Trafficked and At-Risk Youth. My name is Madeline Hare. I'm a Senior Director at the New York State Office of Children and Family Services in the Division of Youth Development and Partnerships for Success. And I'm joined by two colleagues. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and then we're going to share with you some information about the Empower model, how it came to be, how it works, and hopefully encourage folks to send appropriate referrals or consider opening a program. So Bree, I'll ask you to introduce yourself first.
Hey everyone, my name is Bree Bradley. I am the program manager of Safe Harbor Residential Services. Oversee both programs in Valhalla and Queens.
And Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Almanacoli. I am the Director of Youth Services for the Child Welfare Programs, which includes Empower at the Children's Home Poughkeepsie.
Thank you. All right, so why do we have Empower? So Empower is a model of congregate foster care for young people who have been trafficked or are at risk of trafficking. And to be transparent, OCFS had resisted creating a specific model for this for a while because there's still so much that we can learn about this population, and we really take the do no harm principle very seriously. But when the Family First Prevention Services Act came into place in 2021, it changed the landscape of foster care dramatically, and it changed what type of programs were eligible for federal funding. And one of the types of programs that's eligible for federal funding is a specialized program model for the trafficked youth population. And so we figured now is the time, and we're going to do it. So that's why it was created. But we had a very clear set of principles that we were working with as we set up the model. The first is that Empower programs are really about healing, not about treatment. So young people who have been trafficked have all types of lived experience, all types of challenges and barriers that they encounter, and we don't want to pathologize them. Young people can and should and will get clinical interventions, but the clinical interventions around mental health are not the totality of what young people need. So this model is really based in helping young people heal holistically, based in the stages of change theory. The model is based on being trauma responsive, with the intervention being relationships. The main thing that we have seen so far help young people heal is having positive, consistent, healthy relationships with adults. That is the intervention. And so to do that well, the programs necessarily are small. Programs can be, bigger in accordance with our regulations, but when we talk to folks about opening one, we really stress the value of having 4 beds. The smaller the program, the more intervention folks get, because the more time they have to develop really deep relationships. And these programs are community oriented. So they are homes in the community that look just like any other home. Young people go to school, public school, unless they have an IEP that says otherwise. They have jobs, they have recreation. These are not facilities in the middle of nowhere, and they are not locked. In order to run one of these programs, agencies have to have an exceptional commitment to harm reduction and risk tolerance. The young people who come to these programs have significant trauma histories, and those trauma histories come out through behaviors that can be very difficult. And so before even entering into this space, agencies need to know that they will see those behaviors, and they need to work with young people through them. It is not the model to accept young people with very challenging behaviors rooted in trauma and then say, you gotta go. We should expect it and we should plan for it. Similarly, we really need to see exceptional commitment to embedding youth voice and survivor leadership. We'll talk about that later and what some of those strategies are. And really, all of this wraps up in positive youth development. It's the belief that young people are assets in their community, and that if they're given the appropriate opportunities, they will thrive. So a couple of just kind of administrative basics about Empower. All of this is in regulation and policy, which is cited here if you want to go read it. But programs can have up to 12 beds. Again, we really recommend smaller. 4 is the sweet spot. And programs are not gender specific. Programs cannot be licensed or certified for any single gender. And that's really because we recognize that youth across the gender spectrum experience trafficking, and we need to make sure that there's places for all of those young people to go. So from here on out, I'm going to give some of the program specific details, and then I'm going to ask our colleagues on the line to share how this actually works in their program, how they implement it. So who is eligible to be served in an Empower program? Young people have to be in foster care. They have to be identified as trafficked or at risk, and they have to be at least 10 years old. There needs to be a determination that the young person's needs can't be met in a lower level of care, and that's in accordance with all the principles of foster care. If you're going to put a kid in congregate care, it needs to be because their needs can't be met in another way. We also require that young people have an opportunity to learn about Empower before they actually are admitted. So young people don't have a choice about whether they're in foster care or not, but we are trying to build in that voice and choice everywhere we can. And in this model, one of the ways that looks is that young people are able to learn about Empower, what it's about, and decide if they are willing to give it a try. Part of our thinking behind that is that you can't trick a young person into engaging in programming or healing, right? You can't tell them it's a regular group home and then have it be a trafficking specific group home once they arrive. So we really want them to know what they're signing up for, so to speak, so that they are willing to at least try and hopefully not, set other young people back if they come and have no interest in doing this type of work. There are specific forms that need to be filled out to make a referral to an Empower program, and anything specific about exclusionary criteria or anything more detailed than what's in state policy or reg needs to be in the program's policy and procedure manual. So at this point, I'm going to ask Amy if you could start. What are some of the ways that CHOP gives youth opportunity to learn about your program before they're admitted?
Yeah, we start right from the beginning, kind of explaining the setup, as you said, community housing, a lot of community resources like school and employment opportunities and recreational activities. We also go over kind of the population that we work with, and not every youth that we interview necessarily identifies as being trafficked or at risk of being trafficked. So we kind of talk about different situations that maybe they could relate to. So we talk about a walking, we talk about maybe, doing unsafe things just to have a place to stay or something to eat. So we kind of relate it to, common like ways that they could identify into it instead of just being like, we are here for trafficked youth, because not the youth don't always identify as that. So we use a lot of different scenarios that they can kind of relate to and ask them if they understand or if they relate to that. And usually they say, yeah, I relate to that. After that, we kind of go into, so that's what we do. We talk about a lot of safety stuff here. And we do talk about safe relationships and safe situations and how to navigate those. And so we have those conversations right from the get-go, and have them able to understand what it is without, necessarily saying, you are you're a youth that experienced trafficking, because sometimes they don't know or they don't identify as that. We also always ask them like what their goals are, in life, or what their goals are right now, and try to connect different services and different opportunities we provide in our program that could help them with that, so that they can see themselves growing and see themselves, having those goals and really achieving those. We do tours. We've done in-person interviews and tours. We've done virtual tours. Sometimes our youth are 4 hours away, so we have to, do virtual stuff. So we kind of just try to figure out whatever they need to feel comfortable coming. Sometimes we show pictures, is what we really try to do, and make them really understand what our program is about.
Thanks. Bree, anything you want to add that Children's Village does differently?
Yeah, just to add to what Amy is saying, even before the point of the meet and greet, we meet with, their case planners, their current caseworkers, and ask that they provide some of the information so that the youth is not blindsided, so to speak. So at the point of the meet and greet, they're like more willing to talk. I think that the in-person tours are very helpful because our environments are more like a home setting, and maybe they've been in maybe a higher level of care, and it's not so much of a home-like setting. So letting them see the rooms, which we have painted very colorfully, the common areas, the spaces for them to do rec is really helpful for their own buy-in. I think that the in-person tours work very well, as opposed to like a over the phone meet and greet. They get to interact with some of the staff, they get to interact with some of the youth and see what's happening in the program already. And that's usually how we get them to buy in.
Great. Empower programs are required to have robust plans around how they staff and supervise folks who work in the program. We recommend at minimum having 3 staff on at any time and would love to be able to support even more than that. Again, because of the behaviors that some of these young people experience, and also so that staff can support really robust opportunities and activities and just things to stay busy and enjoy themselves. So programs need to articulate what their staffing plan is. They also need to talk about how their positions are advertised and how they consider lived experience in their hiring process. Again, that whole youth voice and choice and survivor leadership kind of commitment is embedded throughout the program design, including here. We also require that programs incorporate youth perspectives in hiring at all levels. So anybody from somebody who works like at a security desk somewhere or a kitchen, all the way up to managerial level positions that would see young people in this space. Young people have to have some sort of opportunity to give input into who gets hired for that. Ree, can you share with us some of the strategies that Children's Village uses to either recruit and retain staff with lived experience or to get youth input in the hiring process?
Yeah, so we do have some of our like alumni youth assist with the interview process. We'll do the first interviews and maybe they assist in the second interviews. We find this helpful because it allows the youth to ask questions related to maybe their own cases or things that they've heard a peer go through in real time. And we get actual responses from the staff and how they would maybe handle a situation. Um, I think that this also helps with the youth feeling comfortable with the staff that they're recruiting or that they're interviewing. Um, and it also gives them a sense of, positive voice, or like they have a say so or control or some type of control in, who is going to be overseeing or supervising them on the shift.
Amy, anything that CHOP does either differently around getting youth perspectives in hiring or around the recruitment and retention of folks with lived experience?
We involve our youth a little differently. Unfortunately, like that's something we want to grow and strengthen and with having them actually in the interview. Unfortunately, it's always during their school time, but we have asked them what they want us to ask and like what they would want to know from the staff. And one of the big things is self-care and how they take care of themselves because the kids always say like, how can they take care of me if they don't know how to take care of themselves? So that's something we really talk about during our hiring process as well.
And that's a perfect segue to empower programs are required to really think about the well-being of their staff. They're required to think about vicarious trauma and burnout through things like supervision, coaching, training, supports, things like EAP. So what are some of the things, Amy, that Children's Home offers to staff to help them process the challenges of this work?
Yeah, we actually have a self-care group for our staff plan this week, where they're going to be talking a little bit about vicarious trauma and then doing a self-care activity. And we try to do those both with our staff and our youth because I think it's important throughout our entire program for all of us to have self-care and really, reflect on those things. We also have various trainings throughout the year regarding vicarious trauma or other things that they could strengthen to be able to support our youth in the program.
Bree, how do you all at Children's Village support your staff?
Yeah, the same as Children's Home of Poughkeepsie. Children's Village offers wellness groups. They do like self-care workouts or yoga sessions. We also do various trainings. I would also like to add that supervision is very important for the day-to-day. The staff sometimes they're dealing with situations that cause a lot of stress. So as leadership, it's important for us, to check in with our staff and help them, through whatever the stressor is or whatever the situation is with the youth, so that they feel supported. And then we also, refer them to EAP if they do need to take mental health days, because that is needed. We'll fill in, tag them out, tap them out sometimes if we're in the milieu. But definitely supervision and coaching and training are very important.
Yeah, and those are some of the things, they're not enumerated on the slides here, but they are requirements, is there are standards for around staff supervision individually and also in group settings, which is different from other voluntary agency requirements under OCFS. There are also expectations that leadership within agencies are a visible presence, and that's really just to make sure, these are challenging programs to run, and we want leadership to be very clear-eyed about what's happening and for youth to have access to leadership as well. So we're going to shift a little bit and talk about the therapeutic model of care. This is another component of Empower programs that's different than standard requirements for voluntary agencies. So Empower programs are required to have a therapeutic model of care, which is different than the clinical interventions available to young people. When we talk about a therapeutic model of care, we're really talking about a coherent approach to the entire program milieu so that everybody who works there, no matter what their title is or their shift is, they have the same understanding of the relational intervention. They have the same set of expectations around risk tolerance. They have some shared language around stages of change so that no matter who the young person is interacting with, they get a same or very similar response. Within that, clinical supports are really important, right? So there are requirements about clinical staff that need to be available and accessible to young people. And again, one of those requirements is that they are actually a visible presence on the floor of the program. We are not interested in having clinicians kind of be off-site or, down a wing where they never come out of their office, but really to be part of the program environment. So like having a meal with the young people on a regular basis, being part of everything so that there's consistency and shared knowledge across, everything. The clinical staff are also expected to engage with permanency resources to help a smooth transition home. They engage in case conferencing, and we also require that they support debriefing conversations following significant incidents. And that is, again, to support not just the young people, but also the staff. Critical incidents are hard on everybody, and everybody should get some support around that. Bree, anything you want to say about the therapeutic model of care or the clinical supports under Children's Village?
Yeah, they are very important in our programs, and it is very important for them to be in the milieu and engaging with our youth. As far as like it goes a long way. When they see that their worker, or the caseworker or the social worker is involved in their planning and what they have going on in a day-to-day, we see a lot of positive outcomes related to them being discharged and being safe and well in the community. So it is very crucial that the caseworker, clinical worker is in the milieu with the youth.
Amy, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think the presence is really important and a little different than some of the other programs that we've had. Um, the access to them is so important. It can't just be the once a week, 1 hour, and that's it, and you can't see anybody. It's so much more than that because our youth need the higher level of care. And it also can't just be sit down therapy. Our therapists are using all different kinds of methods, whether it's art therapy, whether it's walking one of our facility dogs when it's nice outside and the kids just want to take a walk, or gardening. They've done a lot in the summertime and springtime. Just getting our youth out of the office sometimes is so much more helpful than just sitting and, straight talk therapy. So they're very creative with how they work with our youth, which is really important.
We also require that Empower programs have specific supports around physical and sexual health and well-being for young people. This again goes to that whole voice and choice thing for young people. So the expectation is that young people are not simply told, we have a clinic through our agency, this is where your healthcare will be provided. But rather, there is an expectation that young people are educated on how to access healthcare, that they're given as many choices as reasonably exist for them, and that they're active agents in deciding what care they want to access, how and when. Of course, within parameters, but when we think about how much has happened to their bodies at the hands of other people, giving age appropriate, reasonable opportunities for young people to learn about their bodies and how to take care of them is super important. And similarly, that extends to sexual health and well-being as well. One of the things that we have observed through our anti-trafficking work over the years is that folks are really uncomfortable talking with young people about sexual experiences. And when you're talking about kids who have been trafficked for sex, it's critically important that we understand how to help young people process what's happened in their bodies and become healthy sexual beings as adults. So, Amy, anything you want to say about healthcare or sexual health and how you support that for your young people?
Yeah, our medical staff is amazing and they'll sit down and have these conversations, but it doesn't stop there. Our clinical staff will also have those conversations. We have partnered with our local Planned Parenthood. They come in once a month and they do a group with our youth talking about consent or, hygiene or anything that the youth kind of are interested in. And then they do a 1 week group once a year, My Body, My Choice. And then they've provided us with, safe sex packets that we have in all of our offices that our youth can take, which provide, different contraceptions and info packets. And we have those in every single one of our offices available for our youth as well. So it's really just making sure it's the most open conversation, that everyone is, comfortable, and that the youth know that they can go to pretty much anyone on our team and ask those questions.
Bree, how about you?
Yeah, we have something similar built into our program. We use additional resources as well. For Children's Village, they go to safe harbor groups where they talk about, physical and sexual health. We also have a group called GSA, which is our Gay Straight Alliance group, where they talk about different things, healthy relationships, the LGBTQ community. We also have built-in primaries, which is like their one-to-one in our program, where they share different things with. They learn about sexual health. They have any questions, they can go to these primaries. And if there are like medical supports that they need, the staff would pass that, or the primary will pass that information on to the clinician or leadership if the youth would like for that to happen. So they have also a number of people that they can discuss these things with.
So I have a little bit of an off-script question, but tying together things we've talked about so far with hiring and supervision. And a lot of what this work comes down to is judgment and values, right? People have a lot of values about kids and sex and what that should or shouldn't look like. And most of the young people served in Empower settings have experiences that we would not want them to have, right? That's the whole reason they're there. So I'm curious if either of you have had to provide extra support to staff or extra training or extra supervision around how to help your staff navigate their values and their judgments when it comes to the experiences or behaviors of young people in your program. You're both nodding. I'll ask Bree to go first.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we have those conversations in supervision if there is a staff struggling. If it is something that is ongoing, we do provide outside training or training within the agency. Um, they do sexual health trainings monthly, uh, just to get them that support and understanding. And they're also allowed to join the groups with the youth so that they can hear the youth speak about whatever it is that they're going through. So we find that very helpful, the trainings and the supervision, and being consistent in it, just to, not necessarily change their values, but like help their thinking so they can better support our youth.
How about you,
I
Amy?
agree. Yeah, I agree. We definitely use a lot of education. We, as I said, we partner with Planned Parenthood. They also do some groups with our staff. We partner with our local Pride Center. They've come in to work with our staff and youth as well. We train in caregivers from Love 146, which talks a lot about how to have conversations with youth, those tough conversations. So I think caregivers is a really big one as well that we do a couple times of a year. Um, so it's really, and obviously we do the supervision as well as Bree. So if they have further questions, we really work through those things. But really using our community resources is the biggest thing we do because we're not experts on everything. But there are experts in our community that are super local and we try to pull them in.
Great. So positive youth development and youth voice. I think we've touched on that already, but I want to make sure we're really underlining this concept of the reasonable, prudent parenting standard and normalcy. It is a requirement, a federal requirement, that every young person in foster care have the opportunity to experience normalcy, even though they're living out of their home. And that's called the reasonable and prudent parenting standard. What we see is that the more risky the behaviors youth engage in, the less comfortable adults get with offering normative opportunities and experiences. Things like going on a date with an age-appropriate paramour, things like staying out super late on prom night, things that most young people get the opportunity to do. Those opportunities tend to shrink when young people engage in risky behaviors. So I would love to hear how your programs think about normalcy and how you sort of assess what opportunities young people can have and when. Amy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, with this, safety is always our number one question. So as long as the youth is showing us safe behaviors in the group home and in the community, we really encourage some of these things. So we encourage community employment and we help them, gain that and get some experience, which we think is really important. And with that, they can earn independence in our community. Which is like gives them ability to go to the movies with their friends, to go to the local diner, to go down the hill to McDonald's when they just need a break. Homecoming, a lot of our youth are in, after school sports or after school clubs. Prom is coming up, and I know we have a couple kids going to prom. And last year, some kids did have like an after prom party. And just like a normal parent, we're like, all right, we need to know the address, we need to know the name of the person. And they are really good at giving it because they want to go. So we just make sure we have all the information safety wise, and that's our biggest thing. But otherwise, we push them to do anything that they're interested in.
I love it. Bree, how about you?
Same exact thing. In order to provide the normal experience, we need to get as much information as possible as long as they're keeping themselves safe. So we have like a built-in point level system where if they're doing exceptionally well, maybe you get like a later curfew. We have it built in community passes where maybe on the weekend they want to hang out with their friends and go to the movies. They tell us what movie they want to see. We provide tickets tickets, we speak to their friends, drop them off, just normal parenting. We treat them the same way. So, yeah.
Great. One of the requirements for Empower models that I also just want to mention is that there be a youth program manual. I know many programs have this, but it's explicitly required in this setting that the rules and expectations of the program, as well as the opportunities and things young people can access, are presented to young people in a youth accessible way through a youth program manual. So one of the most common questions that comes up around normalcy is cell phone access. One of the requirements of Empower programs is they cannot have a blanket cell phone ban. They can and should have policies around cell phone use and access and what that looks like, but there cannot be just a no cell phone policy. The thinking behind that is we have had many, many stories of young people who find themselves in a dangerous situation and use a cell phone to access safety. And so if we take phones away from young people or refuse to allow them access, we are actually increasing their risk. So Bree, could you talk a little bit about the cell phone policy that you have for young people in your Empower programs?
Yeah, sure. So, um, first, I'd like to talk about the values again. Everybody comes from different walks of life. So, when it comes to the conversation of cell phones, we try to get our staff to understand that we are working with youth who are in care, and they have an attachment to their cell phone because that's how they keep in contact with friends and their family members, the people that they love that they're away from. So we have that discussion with them first. As far as the cell phone policy goes, this is something that the youth ask about at the point of meet and greet. And we let them know up front, we don't want to restrict your cell phone. That's not what we do here. As long as you're maintaining school and you're doing well in school and you're keeping yourself safe, then you don't have to worry about there being any kind of restriction on the phone. And usually they're open to agreeing with the policy, but you focus the conversation around safety, and also the behaviors in the program, and they're able to follow.
Amy?
I second that safety is always our number one thought with this. Same thing, we have that conversation right from the interview and explain to them like what our expectations are earning the phone and keeping the phone. Our expectations are, not using your phone during clinical sessions, during groups, during things like that, during homework time, but otherwise, using it responsibly when you have it. All of our youth have to complete an internet safety course with their clinicians before they can earn it. It's part of like the earning process. And it doesn't stop there. If one internet safety class doesn't solve every issue for teenagers. So we do that throughout our programming and throughout their clinical sessions, whether it's groups or individual. Internet safety is a really big thing right now. But for them to be able to learn how to properly be safe, sometimes they actually have to use the technology to be able to learn and figure that out.
And we have shared so far a lot of kind of examples of how these policies and practices support positive outcomes, and also there will be incidents, right? We know that there's going to be stuff that happens. And so it's a requirement for Empower programs that they have a behavior management approach that is, again, grounded in relationships, that leans into natural consequences, and that incentivizes positive decision making. So that is in comparison to a punitive punishment, kind of lock everything down approach to bad behavior or mistakes. And really what it's grounded in again is that positive youth development approach that young people are supposed to test boundaries. That's their job developmentally. They're supposed to be learning independence. And we need to give them opportunities to fail safely, just like many of us had growing up. That's all kind of couched in this unconditional positive regard. We know that young people who have these types of traumas have one of my least favorite phrases, burned bridges, all over the place, right? And we need them to know that this is a place that they are safe and accepted. That requires us to think about things like restorative practices and how to repair harm when it happens rather than just try and clamp down and punish it away. Similarly, restraints are only allowed in empower settings in order to prevent serious bodily harm. So we really want to keep hands off of bodies unless you have to prevent a child from getting very seriously injured. Um, Amy, I'll ask you to start by talking about your behavior management approach at CHOP and what are some of the strategies you use when things go wrong?
Yeah, we have individual crisis management plans that each youth has that they're able to work with their clinical staff to identify some of their triggers, what helps them when they are escalated, what helps them de-escalate. So we have all of our staff review that and know our youth. Also, besides that, once they build relationships with the youth and the staff, they can kind of have tells that maybe aren't even on there. So it's really the relationships are the biggest thing that we utilize because 90% of the time the relationships can help, de-escalate things pretty quickly. We use a lot of, prompting and verbal techniques. We really don't use a lot of hands-on, as you said. It's very rare. I can't even remember like the last time. So it really is successful with the verbal de-escalations and relationships. Everyone was very nervous about it, but it actually really is very successful. Afterwards, we often do mediations if there's ever any issues, of whether it's between a youth and a youth or a youth and a staff, just to mend those bridges, as you said, or just make sure that the youth know like people aren't just going to leave if you get in an argument or get in a disagreement or a misunderstanding, because usually 80% of the time it's a misunderstanding. So we just really have those sit down talks and try to, get back to where we were and figure out how to move forward.
Bree, what are some of the strategies you all use at Children's Village when things go awry?
In addition to what Amy just noted, the therapeutic crisis intervention, we also, again, have this built-in point level system. When a youth is first admitted, they go under like a observation period where we're assessing whether they could keep themselves safe. And then they usually live on, it's called progression, which is where they're able to engage in regular mandatory programming or non-mandatory programming. And ultimately, the goal is for them to get to Progression Plus, which is like the highest level, and they receive more privileges there. Whenever there is a situation where they are unsafe, we may put them on safety, which again is another observation period to assess whether they can be safe to manage those behaviors. And also, I will add that the verbal de-escalation and not having to restrain works amazing. They end up, respecting, the staff more, because they may come from backgrounds where they were received like corporal punishment or had to be restrained. So they really do appreciate the fact that the staff or leadership or the clinical team talks to them about what they're going through to help manage the behaviors.
Thank you. Another part of the behavior management and incident management approach is the way we think about and talk about AWOCs or being absent from care without consent. So running away, basically. One of the things that we expect in Empower programs is that young people will leave. It's normal. We should just expect it. And so we have Empower programs talk with young people about, again, like their triggers and where they might go and do a lot of safety planning around AWOC. One of the things that we've built into the program to support safety planning around AWOC is programs can claim for a bed for young people who are AWOC for up to 14 days, which is double the amount that agencies can claim for young people who have left the program in non-Empower settings. Those are 7 days. So again, that's in recognition that it will happen, and we want to plan for it and keep stability for young people as long as possible. Uh, Empower programs also have what's called a stress pass, and there's a policy linked here that you could check out, but it's a AWOC prevention tool. So what we really want to do is keep young people out of law enforcement systems. We want to keep them in good communication with programs as much as possible. And so what the Stress Pass does is it helps young people identify where they might go if they're feeling so stressed that they need to leave. There's some agreement to those locations in advance and in writing. And if a young person does leave the program and say they go to grandma's house, who's on this list, then there's communication between grandma and the program. And now the kid's not where they're supposed to be, but they're also not missing. And so it creates some safety and maintains communication, whereas in other cases, young people might just leave the program and disappear, which is very scary for us. So I'm curious to hear from either one of you any specific strategies you use around AWOC prevention, around when young people return from AWOC, anything you want to talk about related to AWOC practice in your programs. And Bree, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I was going to say that the stress pass really works wonders, and it really does aid in keeping the youth safe. A lot of times, the youth are running to family members or friends, and the fact that we are able to establish like an additional resource for the youth is very helpful, in keeping them out of the community and out of like, like juvenile justice system or committing crimes in the community, if they didn't have those resources. So we use the stress passes very often to reduce AWOC, and we have seen a reduction in AWOC.
That's so great. Amy, how about you? What do you all do around AWOC prevention or after young people return?
Yeah, we make sure all of our youth have all of our phone numbers, especially our 24-hour line. We tell them, we will pick you up when you need to be picked up. We tell them, we have them go to like a safe location and we, say we will pick you up when you need it. Call us and we will get you, which kind of ties back into the cell phone, which is really helpful when they have their cell phones. On top of that, like when they have their cell phones, we've had a youth that was in a really dangerous situation in the last year, and law enforcement was able to, ping their phone and be able to find them on this AWOL, and they weren't able to leave a situation. So using our resources and our local law enforcement to help our youth as well. But the cell phones really actually help in AWOL situations because usually we'll start texting them, we'll call them, and they'll be like, "I'm fine, I'm coming." But we're like, "All right, well, we need to make sure you're getting back." So maintaining the conversations with the youth too while they're AWOL is really important for us. To make sure that they know that they're welcome back, and when they come back, making sure that we are welcoming them back, so they know that they're not in trouble, they're not going to get consequences, that they're welcome back, and we want them back in the program and safe. So that's the biggest thing. Like when they come back, I think is the most crucial thing. And I don't know, not like jinx this, but they come back a lot of the times on their own. And really making that setting welcoming and not punitive is really important.
So I really want to underline one of the things you said, Amy, which is that when they come back, they don't have consequences. I think that that runs contrary to a lot of the way that adults in child welfare tend to think about AWOC, and they think that if we punish them when they come back, they won't do it again. So I want to just kind of tie together a lot of the things we've talked about, right? Which is that we want to make sure that young people know this is a place they can come back to and that they won't be rejected, that behaviors, including AWOC behavior, is often deeply tied to their trauma and in some cases is self-preservation, and that sometimes it's normal teenage behavior that we should all expect when we're talking about teenagers, right? So it's not that we let young people run amok and do whatever they want. It's that we're having supportive conversations that welcome them back, that tie conversations about safety and risk and the impact on other young people in the program. It all goes together and it's all about their healing and their safety. Anything either of you want to say more about that? It works. Try it. Okay, the last kind of theme under the incident management section I want to hit on is recruitment. This is a point of, I'll say, intense anxiety for a lot of adults in the system. There's like this fear that if you put young people who have trafficking experience together, they're all going to recruit each other. Maybe, and maybe not, right? So one of the things that is part of the Empower model is that programs have to define what recruitment means, and they have to have policies and procedures for when recruitment is suspected. The reason we took that approach is we found that once we ask people to really think critically about what recruitment is and isn't, a lot of things that were getting adults anxious are actually normal teenage behavior. Things like following each other on social media, things like inviting a friend out when you're going out. Those things can sometimes be interpreted as recruitment when it's really just kids trying to learn how to socialize with each other. So by being very clear about what we mean and don't mean, when we're talking about recruitment, that cuts a lot of the noise out. And sometimes young people do recruit for a wide variety of reasons. So I'd love to hear from both of you what your framework for recruitment is and how you respond when you think that that might be happening in your program. Amy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, this is the hard part. This is one of the harder things. We we start from kind of trying to if there's anything identifiable in their referral material. If there's not, we usually always talk about what recruitment means to the youth in the initial interview. Do you know what recruitment is? Do you know what this means? And like kind of give a scenario and just explain to them like we don't have a tolerance for recruitment. We want everybody to be safe here, and we kind of just have that conversation briefly in their interview and just make sure they understand what recruitment means, because it could either happen to them, or if they've experienced it before, now they know like, hey, we are going to keep you safe from that. We are going to do our best to keep you safe. um, when they're here, we look for power dynamics. If we're seeing some of those things, if we're seeing, a youth take certain kids AWOL every time, and it's like now we're seeing the power dynamic. It's not just them, two kids going to do a teenage thing. We're really seeing this person, orchestrate things, and there's a big power differential or an age differential. But we really try to work with the youth. We have so many meetings with the youth. We try to talk to them, explain more about like what choices they're making, and just talking to them about the safety aspect. And if there's people asking you to do this, if there's people, because 9 times out of 10, there's an adult involved that is asking this of this child, because they're all children in our program. So there's more usually involved than just a child recruiting, as we say. There's always so much more involved.
Bree, what do you all see and how do you all respond?
Yeah, some of the things that Amy named, the different power dynamic, the different ages, and sometimes we do see normal teenage behavior, but it's really important not to assume right off the bat unless a youth outright says that this is what they're going to do. And sometimes that happens too. So then we have to act. But being observant of the behaviors and watching for patterns. Again, if certain youth are continuing to go AWOL with each other is very important. And then once we see that, when they do return, we address the behaviors and the recruiting.
So I'm going to move us along to talk about program discharge and aftercare. One of the concepts, like in many other residential settings, is that discharge planning starts on day one and that there's a lot of engagement with the young person's resources in the community. That might be a permanency resource they're potentially going to be discharged to. It might also be positive resources and people they know that they can't live with. They're still part of that young person's plan and their team. We really encourage step-down placements. SSP programs are a great thing to look at because these Empower programs are very structured, they're very intense, they're highly staffed. To go from that to something like living independently is a big shift. So how can we kind of help the young person step down where that's possible? We require that Empower programs have a discharge criteria and procedure. And really what this is about is that whole concept of risk tolerance. What behaviors are grounds for a discharge from the program and what is expected and part of the normal process. And the goal really is to prevent kind of arbitrary discharge based on one bad incident. It needs to be consistently approached for all young people in the program. We also have an expectation that young people are able to re-enter Empower programs after discharge when they are eligible to do so, when there's space available and there's no, court order preventing. So that really is about that longer term connection. So a young person maybe steps down and they're like, whoa, actually, I'm not ready. I really need to come back and get a little bit more support. The expectation is that, if there's space available, they be welcomed back so that they have that safety net. Bree, anything you want to say about discharge planning and maybe even returning young people to program?
Yeah, something that we do is concurrently plan, because sometimes that is a situation where one plan doesn't work out. So say if a youth had a goal of return to parent, and it didn't work out, we would concurrently plan if the youth is old enough to plan for themselves or uh, be a part of independent living or do independent living. We would work on that with them. We actually have had a youth be stepped down to a foster home and it didn't work out and they re-entered the program and we developed that, long-term relationship with that youth who is actually now a mentor to other youth in our program and works with Safe Harbor programs. So we've actually had this situation for extended time for a youth happen.
Amy?
Yeah, I think with youth that have a safe adult to return to, um, planning from day one and working with not just the youth, but the families from day one is so important for us. We do that through visits, we do that through family therapy, and we also do the caregivers curriculum from Level 146 with the adults, which is really important because now they're going to learn how to have those conversations because luckily these kids have a lot of caregivers in their life, but we want to make sure everyone has that education and training to be able to have those conversations and deal with those situations. But really, like visitation, we have seen be so successful with youth's engagement in the program. If they have a visiting resource, we have seen them be so much more successful and have that consistent adult support in their life, whether it's an adult sibling or other adults. Just having those supports have been so successful for our youth.
And aftercare is also a requirement for Empower programs like others, but there are a couple of nuances that are different about Empower programs. One is that the aftercare needs to be provided for at least 6 months and can be extended if it's requested. Another is that aftercare is individualized, but there also has to be an opportunity for group aftercare. It doesn't have to be as frequent. It doesn't have to be structured in a specific way, but the idea is to create community among young people who have a somewhat rare and very difficult experience, especially important for young people who don't have that permanency resource like Amy was talking about. How do we help them stay connected to a supportive group of people in a not terribly formal way? We really encourage folks to hire peer advocates and mentors and program alum to do this work. We would, of course, encourage that across the board, but this is one place where we feel like it's an easier lift to get some experience as an agency doing that work. Amy, anything you want to say about aftercare?
Yeah, I agree that it's important to get the youth and the families involved in the community. And we do that even when they're in our program because we know that that's our ultimate goal is to reunify them with their community. So even in aftercare, we help them connect to sports groups, different groups in the community, the parents as well. If they need any resources, we connect them, whether it's parenting classes, whether it's substance, whether it's anything that they need, we're connecting them so that they have that support system when we have to, after the 6 months when they're not going to have as many supports from us.
How about Children's Village, Bree?
Yeah, Children's Village has an aftercare division that works with our youth. It's called Way, and they do a lot of that community work with our youth. We still, invite them to events if there's ever any resources that a parent or themselves need. We find them the resources, so we remain connected even after discharge.
We have covered a lot of ground, and there's so much we haven't even touched on yet. But I want to ask each of you if there's any kind of closing thoughts, lessons learned, success stories, things you're proud of, things you want to brag about. Like, this is your moment. What would you want to convey to somebody who's either thinking about referring a young person to an Empower program or who's thinking about opening an Empower program? And Bree, I'll start with you.
Um, I'd say that the work is not easy. Every day is different. It is challenging, but it is rewarding. We've had youth come into our program with very little resources, and we supported them in getting those resources. We've had youth, stay long term because of it. One youth in particular, she had so much trauma. And it took a lot of treatment and therapy to get her to where she is today. She actually stayed with us longer term. And she is so successful. She was discharged to a foster parent. She's now in college looking to be a social worker, and also a mentor to our youth and works with our Safe Harbor youth. So very, very rewarding work.
Thank you. Amy?
I will second that it is not easy, but it is rewarding. I feel like everyone in our program will say that across the board. Um, but even from like the little things where youth have come home from school after just coming to our program and our staff are asking like how their day was and they like look shocked and they said, no one's ever asked me how my school day was. From those little things to them getting like their first family meal and like being able to sit down with and they're like, I didn't know families did this. And just having them have those realizations that they can be a child again and they can have those childhood experience of going roller skating and going bowling and things that they never would have opportunities to do to the other successes that we've seen with our youth graduating high school and some of our youth that have graduated have been the first ones in their family to graduate or get college acceptances and some of them have been the first ones to ever go to college and we have a youth right now in our program that is graduating with her associate's degree, and she's been on the dean's list for both 2 years and she is now accepted into a SUNY school and going there for her 4 year and like such amazing opportunities that these youth are really taking advantage of and I think that's the most rewarding when they're really taking advantage of all the opportunities we have and they're really hitting their goals and like each goal that they hit we are like it's so amazing to like watch and it's so fun for our program and we celebrate anything we can. I think that's one of the biggest things. Celebrate anything you can. We celebrate birthdays, graduations. If our staff are having graduations, we'll have the kids celebrate those staff's graduations or anything that we can celebrate, we try to celebrate and show the kids that like things are worth, celebrating and things are worth, when you earn it, like these are big things. So we really try to take advantage of all those positive opportunities.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just say, for folks who are interested in referring a young person to an Empower program, this is what you're signing up for. It might feel different than other things or other settings you've worked with in the past, but the outcomes really are quite impressive. The people who do the work are dedicated and committed and really lead with love. So if a young person fits the eligibility criteria, I would encourage you to reach out to, either Children's Village or Children's Home. For agencies who feel like this really resonates with them, we could definitely use more. There are wait lists all the time. We would encourage folks to consider opening an Empower program. And if you're not ready to go all the way in, plenty of the practices and principles and approaches and strategies we've covered today can be embedded anywhere. And so you can start with that. If you want to learn more, there's some links here about, resources. There's contact information for everybody on the screen. We encourage you to follow up. And I just want to deeply thank you, Bree and Amy, for sharing your expertise with us, for doing this work every day. Can't do it without you. Thank you, everybody.